So I like to start my talks, if you've never been to one before, with me humiliating myself for a few minutes. Typically I do this by telling a story of a time that I made a mistake. And this talk's going to be no different. I do this for a couple of reasons. I do it because I want you to know why this topic is meaningful to me and to understand why I put my time into doing these types of talks. But I also want you to feel sorry for me so that these guys will invite me back again. So the story I'm going to tell this time is I got into leadership really, really early. By the time I was 24 years old, I was running a team of 10 people. I had no idea what I was doing. What 24-year-old knows how to be an employee, let alone a leader of people? So I made a bunch of mistakes, a whole heap of mistakes. And I've spent the past 15 years trying to atone from them and learn from them. One of the mistakes that I made was, there was me, a mid-level engineer and a senior engineer. We were having an architectural discussion. We were trying to decide what route to take in terms of how we built this particular piece of functionality. So we were having a very intense disagreement on how we should go about building this piece of software. I felt that this was a productive discussion. I felt like we were really getting into it and we were really getting to the bottom of how we should build this piece of functionality. But I also noticed that the mid-level engineer was being very quiet during this heated debate. And I thought, okay, this is a perfect opportunity for me to talk to this person about assertiveness and how to engage in a debate like this. What I didn't say in the start of this was me and the senior were men and the mid was a woman. And what I hadn't realized I was doing in that moment was reinforcing a gender stereotype, which is that women should be more assertive, just like men, in inverted commas. And so I look back on it, I can feel it, literally I can feel it right now. Every time I tell this story, I feel this shiver go down my spine of the mistake that I made that day. Because I thought we were in a healthy conflict. The senior and I were going at it, we were talking to each other, we were debating, but we were not in a healthy conflict. We were in an unhealthy conflict. Because whether it's a healthy conflict or an unhealthy conflict depends not on what you think, but what on the other person thinks. You can think you're in a healthy conflict and actually be in an unhealthy conflict. So that's why I did this talk, is because I like to tie these things into mistakes I've made in the past, and that was one that still haunts me to this day, and me talking about it is my catharsis of trying to get over it. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to talk about unhealthy and healthy conflict, the difference between the two, and we're going to discuss the benefits of healthy conflict. Why do we actually want healthy conflict? You know, at first glance you might go, okay, let's just never have conflict then. But there's actually benefits in conflict, done well. And then we can go through the how do we make sure that healthy conflict is the conflict that arises and not unhealthy conflict. And we'll end with some Q&A at the end. So you're probably wondering, who is this person? Bok said I've been here before. For those of you who haven't seen one of my talks before, I'm Andrew. I'm a long-term father of a flock of chucks, or as we call them in England, chickens, and short-term father of a flock of children, or as we call them in England, financial burdens. And I love traveling the world. It gets funnier the fourth time, doesn't it? I love traveling the world. I love seeing everything, and that's how I found myself in Australia, is because I can't stay in one place for too long. I had a goal pre-COVID to visit 2 new countries every year. I did it every year from 21 to just before COVID. I say that in Australia and everybody goes, wow. Say that to a European audience and they go, oh, so you drove in a circle then? Because in Europe, everything's so close together. Literally, you can just do this big loop and visit like 10 countries. This year, I'm back on track. I have visited 4 new countries this year already. So I'm trying to make up for lost time. From a professional point of view, I've been an engineer pretty much my entire life, almost. I learned to code when I was 8 years old. My dad taught me. Building computers, built my first computer when I was 13. I'm a nerd. I love being a nerd. It's awesome to be a nerd. But like I said, I've also been in leadership really, really early. Made all of these mistakes, and a realization I had about 5 years ago was that I didn't want other people to have to make the same mistakes that I made. And so I started teaching, training, and coaching people on being a better leader in technology, because it's an area we suck at. Again and again in our industry, we promote the longest tenure engineers into leadership positions and sit back and watch as they fail. That's what happened to me, and it's what happens again and again in our industry, and I didn't want to see that happen anymore. And so now what I do is I run a company called Tech Leaders Launchpad, where we focus on teaching, training, and coaching technology leaders to not be the bad leader that I was 15 years ago, and to be better. Okay, so question, I like to start these with questions. What is conflict? Like, what can cause conflict? What are the things that can actually cause the thing we're talking about? These are a few things that I think of when I think of conflict. We talked about debating languages and frameworks. Should we build this new thing in Swift UI or not? That could be a conflict. Are we going to build it using CQRS, or are we going to build it using a REST or GraphQL endpoint? Are we going to build this thing ourselves, or are we going to use something pre-baked from AWS? These can all arise conflict. But there can also be other things that are more kind of intrinsic to the way we work, things like knowledge hoarding. If we talked about this earlier with the Scala example. If you've got a knowledge base that you believe is what makes you distinct and unique and is the reason you get paid, you can actually start holding that within an organization, and that can lead to conflict. Something else that can be done is ego-driven code ownership. This is my code. I own this code, and nobody else touches it. We've all seen that. I've definitely seen that. Another thing can be working styles. Whenever we have to talk to each other about something, do we do it asynchronously using Slack? Do we hop on Zoom? Do we have a phone call? One of those weird things. This thing isn't just for browsing the internet, I know, shocking. All of these things and the way that we work can lead to conflicts. But there's something that combines all of these together. There's an underlying thing in this, which is every single one of these has high investment and high impact. And what do I mean by those two things? Investment doesn't just have to mean financial investment. It can mean financial investment. If we take, for example, build or buy, that can be a high investment in the outcome of that. But it can also be emotional investment or ego investment, a sense of who you are. So, if I'm somebody who believes, I went to a TDD workshop, so I apologize, I'm going to use TDD as an example of this. People who like TDD often are very big advocates of TDD. It's brilliant, but that is the case. And so often somebody will advocate for TDD, and they've got a lot of emotional investment in that. But it could be the same with Swift UI. Somebody's like, this is the new thing, we should use it for everything. So emotional investment, but also impact. Things that don't have high impact, often the conflict doesn't arise because nobody cares about the outcome. But if there's high impact in the decision that's made out of the conflict, that means you're going to have a conflict at the end of it. Okay. So I've talked about what conflict is. I've given you some examples of conflict. So what's the difference between a healthy conflict and an unhealthy conflict? Does anybody want to hazard a guess, and I'll repeat it for the live stream?
Emotional investment?
Yeah, I mean, you can still have emotional investment. You can still have emotional investment in a healthy conflict. Like, I can genuinely care about the outcome of what's happening, and feel like my personal investment is on the line, but it could still be a healthy conflict. Anybody else? Aggression. That's a great one. So, what do you mean by aggression? Believing your point is the almighty truth. Pushing it as far as you can, yeah. So I guess physical aggression could be, pushing forward, and if I went like this, that's an example of potentially aggressive. Yes?
False consensus?
Ooh, false consensus. I love that one. That's a great thing that can happen. Why? Well, actually, bookmarking that. We'll come back to it. Last one.
Ease of repeatability.
Ease of repeatability. Say more.
Yeah. So with a healthy conflict, you should sort of welcome it because you'll both gain something, or you will have many people gain something.
Yeah. So in healthy conflict, you feel like you gain something, and in unhealthy conflict, maybe you feel like you lose something. Yeah, that's a great example. I'm gonna try and give you a definition of them, and it's gonna somewhat come back to what was just mentioned there. Often when we have an unhealthy conflict, it's because there's misaligned goals or the outcomes we're trying to achieve. If you've got two people who are debating on what path to take, and they both want to get to a different goal, you're gonna have an unhealthy conflict because there isn't a meeting of what they want to achieve together there. If you've got people who lack respect and trust in each other, you're probably going to have an unhealthy conflict because there's not a meeting of the minds on why this is important to have healthy conflict. If you have unhealthy conflict, often it's because people don't respect each other and they don't care about the other person's opinion. Another thing that can lead towards unhealthy conflicts is negative intent. Not just negative intent, but assumed negative intent. If I don't believe that you have the best interests at heart, this is going to devolve very, very quickly into an unhealthy conflict. So all of these can be summarized in a really, really simple way, which is in unhealthy conflict, people win, and in healthy conflict, ideas win. That's what we want. We don't want to have a conflict, and at the end of the conflict, for me to feel like you won the conflict. We want to have a conflict and feel like the best idea won. And it doesn't matter who said it. So when we have misaligned goals, it's really hard for the best idea to win. And it becomes a battle of egos and a battle of aggression. When we have a lack of respect in each other, it's really hard for ideas to win because we start doubting the ideas, not on their own validity, but on the person who said the idea. And when we have negative intent, it's very similar as well. We start doubting that the person is suggesting that idea because it's the best thing for us, and we start thinking that person's suggesting the idea because it's the best thing for them. So if that's what healthy conflict is, you might ask the question, why should we have it in the first place? Well, I've told you why. It's because we want ideas to win. If we have conflict all the time and people win, it's never going to be the best kind of use of our time in debating things. So there's a whole heap of ancillary reasons that come off that here. If we're having healthy conflict, we improve the problem solving. We come up with better ideas because everybody's listened to and all of their ideas are debated equally. It breaks down silos between different teams because we're having these discussions and it becomes normalized that we talk about things. Often when you've got silos in organizations, the reason they exist is because people don't talk to each other because they don't trust each other, they don't respect each other, or they believe that those people are trying to get their own aims achieved rather than the collective aims. We don't have time to go through all of these. Does somebody want to pick one and I'll dive into it in more detail that looks particularly interesting to them, or they're curious why it's there? Go for it.
Encourages accountability.
Yeah, encourages accountability. So if you've got a situation where you've got an unhealthy conflict, what can often happen is the person who feels it's an unhealthy conflict feels a lack of connection with the decision that was made. They believe that, okay, well, if it succeeds, then great, they were part of the decision-making process. But if it fails, it wasn't their idea anyway. And so if you've got unhealthy conflict, people are not bought into the decision that's been made. And so they don't feel accountable for the outcomes of that decision. So we actually want healthy conflict, excuse me, we actually want healthy conflict because it means that everybody's brought along the decision-making process and everybody feels a part of that, which means everybody feels a part of the outcome and accountable for that outcome. Has anybody heard of the cognitive bias called the IKEA effect? This is great. This is awesome. I love this. So the IKEA effect, what they basically did, the experiment they ran, was they got a bunch of people to build IKEA furniture. And then they asked them to value that furniture in terms of dollars. They then took those people out of the room. They took another bunch of people into the room. And they asked those people to value the furniture. So you had two lots of people. One that had built the furniture and valued it, and one who had just valued the furniture without building it. Every time they ran this experiment, the group that built the furniture and then valued it at 20% higher than the group that had not built it and valued it. This tells you something about who we are as humans, in that we disproportionately weight the value of the things in which we've been the creators of. So if we create something, we value it more highly than if we didn't create it. And you can use that cognitive bias in conflict. If you've got somebody that you're having a disagreement with, get them to be involved in the decision-making process, and then they will feel bought into that decision-making process. Anybody else got something they want to double-click on and go into? Yeah.
I was going to say promotes learning.
Promotes learning, yeah. So if we've got a place where everybody's encouraged to bring ideas to the table, and that those ideas are valued and weighted equally, irrespective of who brought it to the table, what you'll find is more introverted people, more junior people will bring more ideas to the table. And in bringing those ideas to the table, they're going to put research to come up with the best ideas. They're going to think through the process. If they feel like they bring an idea to the table and it gets dismissed out of hand because of who they are, they're not going to put the effort in the first place in coming up with a sensible idea. Last one before we move on. Yeah.
Break down silos.
Break down silos, brilliant. So what we've got there is if we have people who have unhealthy conflict all the time, it breeds silos. What we actually want is we want people to have conflicts and have debates. Because if you only have unhealthy conflict, what happens is those teams drift apart. They stop wanting to talk to each other. They stop wanting to communicate. You can see this really easily. If you're working in a company and people start using terms like, oh, this is what product management want, this is what design want. If they're saying that and they're not saying individual people's names, you've got a silo brewing there. Because product management doesn't want anything. Product management is a name on a piece of paper somewhere. It can't have a want, it can't have a desire. It's the humans that have wants and desires. And so if you're seeing that language, you've got these silos, and it's because people don't want to engage in debate. If you engage in healthy debate and you engage in having this discussion of ideas, then what you'll find is the language changes more to, oh, well, Jessica had this idea, Jennifer had that idea, Gordon had this idea. Because people don't mind talking about ideas in the same way. Cool. So how do you know if you're in an unhealthy conflict or a healthy conflict? Like we've talked about the end of it, ideas win versus people win. How do you tell in the moment whether you're in an unhealthy or a healthy conflict? The phrase I want you to think about is safe dialogue. Safe dialogue. These two words, and they're both as equally important as each other. Dialogue is pretty simple. Dialogue means more than one person talking. It's not a monologue. If you've got a monologue, it's not a healthy conflict. It's a lecture. And so you need dialogue in order to have a healthy conflict. Pretty obvious. The other one is a little bit more complex. Safe. What does safe mean? Well, psychologically safe is the biggest part of this. People feeling like they can bring their ideas to the table. People feeling like they're not in conflict in an unhealthy way. What does that mean? Well, when people feel unsafe, there's typically two styles of behavior they exhibit. It's either what I call withdrawing dialogue or forcing dialogue. You might have seen these referred to before as fight or flight or silence or violence. I don't like those terms. Those terms are too extreme for what occurs in workplaces. I hope you're not fighting and flighting in your workplace, but these get toned down to this idea of forcing dialogue and withdrawing dialogue. So we talked about it earlier. Forcing dialogue. If I'm in a Zoom meeting and suddenly my face gets closer to the camera, it's probably an indication that I'm forcing dialogue. Or if I just look to the side and, just checking my email, it's probably a sign that I'm withdrawing dialogue. These could be an indication that the person feels unsafe, because they don't feel like the words that they're saying, the ideas they're putting forward, are being listened to. Think back to my story in the beginning. There was me and the senior. Me and the senior were having a healthy conflict. The mid-level was sat back, not engaging in it. She was withdrawing dialogue from that conflict. I should have noticed that. I should have. So when you're having a conflict, I'd love for you to have a little background thread in your mind that's looking at everybody in the conflict. If you're in a Zoom window, this is really easy, because if you're around a meeting room and you're suddenly just staring at everybody's face, it can get a bit awkward. Whereas when you're on Zoom, the great thing is you can actually just look at everybody and it doesn't feel as awkward. So I encourage you to look and see what people are doing and see if they're withdrawing or forcing dialogue. Because if they are, it's an indication that you're in or are moving towards an unhealthy conflict. Okay, so we can either dive into... how much time do I have left?
How much time do you want?
So
Another 10 minutes.
Another 10 minutes. Okay, so we can either dive into how do we fix this in a cultural way over a longer period of time, or if you find yourself in an unhealthy conflict, how do you get out of it in the moment? We don't have time for both. So hands up if you want to do cultural fix.
Oh, long term, okay.
All right, hands up if you want to do short term. Cool, short term. All right. Okay. Scan the QR codes if you want to follow along. You don't have to. It will just save you from looking at something on the screen. If you want to look at it, this QR code will be at the end as well. So if you miss it, it doesn't matter. If you go through this and you're like, damn, I wish I'd missed that. I'd scanned that QR code. It'll be at the end as well. Okay, cool. So the model, the mental model that I want you to use to get out of an unhealthy conflict and into a healthy conflict is one that I call the pause model. So the pause model is, I love backronyms. I'm sorry, I love backronyms because I think they're a great way of remembering things. So whenever you see one of my talks, there'll be a backronym in there somewhere. Does everybody know what a backronym is?
I was going to say, what are you saying, backronym?
Backronym, yeah. So a backronym is basically a forced acronym. So I said to myself, I wanted to use the word pause as my acronym, and then I broke my back for 6 hours working out how I could use pause as an acronym. It was really hard. Okay, so the process of going through and moving an unhealthy conflict to a healthy conflict starts with preparation. It starts with acknowledging that you're in an unhealthy conflict. This is what I didn't do in my story in the beginning. I didn't know I was in an unhealthy conflict. So you've got to actually accept that and say to yourself, I am in an unhealthy conflict. Then we've got to spend some time getting ourselves in the right mindset and gaining the courage to do this stuff. The talk that Bock referred to that I did in July on difficult conversations is great for this. Go back to it and watch it, because you can use it. You'll notice a lot of the words on this page are the same as the model that I used for difficult conversations. Because what is a conflict if not a difficult conversation? So here we're preparing ourselves, we're getting in the mindset, and we're gaining the courage and composure to do it. Because if we go into this without being composed, if we let our emotions override our logic, we're not going to be able to resolve this well. So the next step is to actively listen. Whenever we're having a conflict we want to resolve and move to a healthy conflict, the first thing we do is not talk. The first thing we do is listen. Because the other person's probably as frustrated as you are, if not more. The other person probably has something they want to say to you and get out. And your two choices here are just to go at each other or to take ownership and responsibility for the relationships in your life and shut your mouth and listen. I'd encourage the latter. So I always say the first thing is to ask that person, we have a conflict, tell me about your view of the conflict. Why do you think we had a conflict? How do you feel about it? Ask open-ended questions to that person. An open-ended question is a question which basically doesn't have yes or no as an answer. If I said to you, are you angry with me? You could just say yes, or you could say no. Conversation kind of ends there. If I said, how do you feel? How did you feel when I said that? What did that make you think? What did that make you feel? That's an open-ended question, and that leads to a lot more debate and a lot more in-depth discussion. Listen to what they're saying, empathize with them, and respect their opinion. They may be wrong, they may be factually wrong, but their emotions are real, and we can't dismiss them, we have to respect them. Ask open-ended questions, understand, assume positive intent. Assume that, most people don't go to work thinking, I'm going to make Andrew's life a misery today. Most people don't. 99.9% of humans are good people. The chance that you found the 0.1% that's an arsehole is possible but unlikely. You might as well assume that the 99.9% an error on the side of that. So assume that they've got positive intent. We've listened to them, we've asked open-ended questions, we've understood, we've empathized. Now is the time for us to talk. At no point during this, up to this point, have we shared our opinion. This is when we do it. Once they stop talking, once they have nothing else to say, this is when we share our opinion of what's going on. We can correct their assumed negative intent. So say, for example, they said, you went behind my back to my boss because you don't trust me. That's what they said. Notice in that statement, they assumed intent, because you don't trust me. We should correct that intent. No, I spoke to your boss because I felt like I wasn't getting anywhere with you and I needed help to resolve this situation. Or no, I spoke to your boss because they came to me first. This is when we can correct their assumed negative intent. Really important here, still apologize. Still apologize. There's nothing, apologies cost you nothing. So just do it. Just say, I'm sorry that we ended up in this situation. I'm sorry that this is a conflict that we're having. I'm sorry that this is a shitty situation that we're both in. It doesn't cost you anything to apologize, just do it. Then you can share your perspective. We've been through this whole cycle, and now is the time to share your perspective. Do it as empathically, do it as objectively as you can. But do share your perspective. Lastly, what we want to do to end this and to move on from this conflict and get to start the relationship anew is to remind ourselves of the common goals we have with each other. So everybody has common goals. If you're trying to build the best software for your customers, that's a common goal. If you're trying to architect something in the best way possible, that's a common goal. The common goal might just be we both want to go to work and not feel bad when we see each other walk down the hallway. That's a common goal. Whatever, there will be something there. Then agree on what happened and agree what will happen. Often when conflicts occur, it's because people don't have decision-making frameworks with each other on how to deal with this kind of stuff. My wife and I, we know exactly what we will do if we have a conflict. There's a whiteboard in our living room, and if we're having a conflict, the first thing we do is clear the whiteboard and start doodling and diagramming and trying to get our brains out. That's the first thing we do. So if my wife walks towards that whiteboard and gets the whiteboard marker out, I know to stop whatever I'm doing because we're going to be having an intense conversation. You can also see this from the stages of a team, storming, forming, norming, that kind of stuff. When you go through that storming phase, a lot of conflict happens then. And it's good to get conflict in a team in the beginning because you learn how they work with each other. So if you don't have those frameworks, discuss what they could be. Say, next time we have a conflict with each other, the first thing we do is we go and have a coffee together. The next time we have conflict with each other, the first thing we do is walk away from our computers for 5 minutes, come back, and then discuss it. Doesn't matter what it is, just agree with each other what that decision-making framework is. Okay, cool. So that's it. That's my talk. Just to give you some more QR codes, if you want to learn more about me and what I do, that's in the bottom left. That worksheet, if you missed it, is the second one. There's a free training course I put together on the debugging difficult conversation stuff that goes through a bunch of examples of how to do this kind of stuff if you're struggling with it. And if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I do regular live streams. I'm doing a live stream tomorrow on mentoring and growing your team. I also post a bunch of stuff on LinkedIn if you want to follow me. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Andrew. I think I realised that we have an unhealthy conflict with our legal team at work, and we should probably talk to them a bit more. Questions in the audience?
Could you reflect on why the senior didn't pick up the conflict?
Could I reflect on why the senior didn't pick up on the conflict?
You took ownership.
Yeah.
You said, I should have done it. In reality, if it's 10 years your senior...
Sure. So I have, as part of my personality, I have what I call radical ownership, in that I basically believe that I should take ownership of all the relationships in my life. That doesn't mean sole ownership. I don't mean by that I believe that I have the sole responsibility for managing relationships, but I believe that I do own those relationships, and that I don't abdicate any of that responsibility ever. If anything occurs that I'm unhappy with in a relationship, it's my job to fix it. It's also the other person's job, but it's definitely still my job. So that's probably just a conflict of a result of me feeling that way.
You talked a lot about like negative and bad conflicts, but how do we encourage positive conflicts?
Yes. So this is the bit that I didn't get to. TLDR. Make sure you've got more of the left. Make sure you got more of the right and less of the left. Like, what are you doing in your teams? How are you thinking about those goals that you have? Just to give a really quick example on this. Often, if you have like a capability matrix, if you're saying to people, say, to go from mid-level engineer to senior engineer, you need to own the technical implementation of something. The problem with that is that you've just created misaligned goals in your team, because the person who wants the promotion to senior now has a different goal to everybody else, which is to technically own the implementation of something, even if that's not the best choice for the team. So the TLDR is think about how you could be creating misaligned goals. Think about how you could build more trust in your teams and how you can encourage positive intent. Unfortunately, I can't stay for networking afterwards, but if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, we can talk about this some more.
Any techniques for promoting healthy conflict for dispersed teams of Slack, etc.? Yeah,
so with dispersed teams, it's harder because often trust takes longer to build in remote teams. It just does. We're humans, we're social creatures. I love remote work. I'm never going back 5 days a week in an office. However, it is harder to build trust remotely and takes longer. So often with remote teams, the issue with conflict is trust and respect. And so putting a focus on how you can do that, how can you build trust in those teams? How can you get them to spend non-transactional time together? So often with remote teams, what happens is you only talk to somebody when you want something from them. And so you don't build trust. If I only ever talk to you when I want something, I'm not going to build trust. How can you get your team to spend time together that is social? Not mandated fun time at 3 o'clock on a Friday. That doesn't work. But just any time that is not time when they're trying to get something out of each other. Cool.
One last question.
What advice would you have for an introverted person to participate in conflict and not let fear of people hating them win?
Yeah. You won't believe this, but I'm an introvert. For somebody who stands up on a stage as his job, I'm an introvert. I'm going to crash after this. I'm going to go home and I'm going to go into what my wife calls my hole, which is my study, and I'm not going to leave for the rest of the evening because I've spent all of my social energy standing up on this stage. So I feel you. I'm an introvert and I struggle with this as well. I think recognizing in yourself that you don't need to be aggressive to resolve these conflicts. You don't need to be somebody who forces dialogue to resolve these things. But understanding that withdrawing dialogue is just as bad as forcing dialogue. And, you know, the looking to other people to help is a good way of doing it. Even just trying to find that little bit of extroversion and confidence to just say the words, hey, I'm in an unhealthy conflict here. I need 5 minutes. Just find that little bit, recover, regroup, and then come back. I find that really powerful myself, to just leave the situation for 5 minutes and come back. It genuinely helps me massively. So try that. Cool.
Awesome.